So wonderful to be here at St. Vincent, and I really appreciate the invitation from the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Watkins, and the Charles and Anita Manoli Scholarship Committee. And I want to recognize in a special way Mrs. Anita Manoli, and to thank her and the Manoli family for being here tonight. So as the sixth Manoli lecturer, I'm aware that the previous five were taught by Mr. Manoli 3 decades earlier than when he taught me, but it's a credit to him for his lifelong commitment to this college, and his influence was just as strong in the 90s. I'm honored to present this lecture in tribute to him. I'm happy to see so many folks that I love so well as professors, Dr. DePasquale, Dr. Summers, and so many others. It's one of those special things about St. Vincent that we make these connections with our professors and with our fellow students that last long after we graduate. And I'm thankful to St. Vincent for so much, but especially that. And I want to thank the students that are here for your time and interest. I know you could be watching Netflix or even worse, doing your coursework. So thank you. So what I'm going to speak to you about tonight, this evening, didn't exist when I was here with accounting and literature, and I'm not talking about blockchain yet. I'm talking about what we think of as the internet. Facebook, Google, BuzzFeed, Fortnite, Netflix, and the problems that we face in terms of how those companies exploit our digital identities and profit from them. But let's level set and get a timeline here for what we actually mean by the internet. First was the internet, like capital I internet, or the web, or the net. These are like crazy words. Let's call that the 90s internet. That was the first version, which, by the way, 2 days ago, we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of, March 12th, 1989. See, I can still do a little math, and it's actually written right here, so that also works out well. So we had that 90s internet. Then we came to Web 2.0. And that version of the internet focused on interaction and participation of commerce and social media and big data. We still find ourselves in Web 2 today, in 2019, albeit a hyper, deeply problematic and late-stage version of that internet. And finally, what I hope to impress upon you all is that we're at the beginning of a next version of the internet, Web 3. A decentralized world built on the underlying protocols of blockchain. So, capital I internet, Web 2.0, and now Web 3. So now many of you have probably heard of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and I hope, by the way, you have a lot of questions in our little Q&A session after as well. I like questions, I like interactions, I like that dialogue. But aside from Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, you probably haven't heard much more. You know, in cocktail conversations, when someone asks me what I do, and I say, develop blockchain solutions for the media and advertising industry, usually 3 things happen. One of 3 things. 1, they walk away. Or 2, they say, so wait, exactly what is blockchain? Or C, oh, my friend owns some Bitcoin. So it's either 2 or 3. I usually then say, do you have more than a few minutes to talk about what that actually is? Because explaining blockchain is like explaining 50 things at the same time, all of them interconnected, and really none of them individually make much sense or even why you would actually care. So I'm going to get into a definition a bit and build upon that, but I want you to know that blockchain is a system, it's a structure. It's technical, but more importantly, it's philosophical, whose goal is to bring about self-sovereign identity for your own ownership of your data and bring that to the internet. So this is a history lecture. So before we talk in detail about blockchain, let's recap a little more about each of those versions on where we've been to date. So for some context, as we heard so wonderfully from some of my once and future friends, hopefully, still after this. For some context here, in the mid-90s, we barely had email here at SVC. In fact, my first email was to that handsome gentleman right there, Mike Walsh. See, in the spring, I know, I usually laugh when I hear that he's handsome too. That's usually... So in the spring of '95, when I took that semester at LSC, as Father Brian says, and Mike and I actually were emailing for the first time back and forth to come for spring break to visit, for me, that emailing looked like a bunch of messages, lines of code, green characters on a black screen, and that's about it. That was the reality. And the internet at that time, wowza. See, back then, things looked a little bit different. Oh, sure did. There we go. This was ESPN. This looked a bit different back then. It's, it was one photo. It took forever for that photo to render. This was the New York Times. My favorite is where it says to click on one of our sponsors' logos. None of that actually really ever caught hold either. Nobody ever clicks on banner ads. Nobody ever does that. But and the sponsors were Advil and the Crown Plaza. That was it. That was the internet in 1995. And I don't even know what this is. Interactive age, digital. It's like 3 words that they mashed together that was supposed to represent what the internet was. It was crazy. And there's Amazon, by the way. Welcome to Amazon.com books. And it was amazing. 1 million titles at consistently low prices. This is what they had to offer. According to Business Insider in 1995, this internet had only 10 million active users at this point. This is what I grew up with. Only 35 million people had email. And it's pretty amazing that Amazon actually enabled 10 million of those users to choose from 1 million books. So they were actually really kind of ahead of the curve at that point in time. But it's this building of the internet, this version, that laid the foundation blocks for the challenges that we're going to discuss today. Cookies, tracking, non-peer-to-peer interactions as intended, but relying and porting over centralized institutions. Wasn't the internet supposed to be free and democratic and anonymous? I don't know, who feels that today? See, even the guy who started it all, no, not Al Gore. Al Gore did not exactly invent the internet. And an editor's note, I actually said Al Gore didn't invent the internet, and Mike Walsh said, no, he wouldn't change it to exactly. We can't disparage Al Gore. We need to make sure that we have that present. So, didn't exactly invent the internet. I'm actually talking about Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the English engineer from Boston who invented the essential building blocks of the internet in 1989, 30th anniversary. So while at CERN, the European Particle Physics Lab, he wrote the specs on, among others, HTTP, HTML, and submitted his first proposal for an information management system, a World Wide Web, to share information about the world. Last September, he published a post on Medium, which is a website that is a longer form Twitter, that lays out the present state of the state, as it were, for what we're talking about today, for Web 2.0 at the moment. And I'm going to quote from this article, the founder of the internet. I've always believed that the web is for everyone. We have created a better and more connected world, but for all the good we've achieved, the web has evolved into an engine of inequity and division, swayed by powerful forces who use it for their own agenda. The current model is where users have to hand over personal data to digital giants in exchange for perceived value. That must change. As we all discover, this hasn't been in our best interest. We must evolve the web in order to restore balance by giving every one of us complete control over our data, personal or not, in a revolutionary way. Furthermore, on this 30th anniversary, he penned an open letter and noted that the 3 sources of this present dysfunction are among them, and I quote, system design that creates perverse incentives where user value is sacrificed, such as ad-based revenue models that commercially reward clickbait and the viral spread of information. These are powerful statements from the individual that created the internet. Just think about that for a second. Perceived incentives where user value is sacrificed. Personal data to digital giants for that perceived value. This is why the internet of the 90s got wrong. This is what it got wrong. This set us on the course for where we are today. So when we talk about digital giants, what are we talking about? Yep, we're talking about Facebook and Amazon and Google, but also American Express and Equifax and HBO, centralized institutions that collect, use, and sell and profit from your personal data. Doesn't that sound like every online company? It does, doesn't it? And that doesn't shock you? And that's the problem. There's a host of other valid claims and concerns about what's wrong with our digital lives. Disassociation from live social interactions, disproportionate allocation of our digital time versus other noble analog pursuits. But this concept of owning your personal data, having self-sovereign identity, is what I want to focus on this evening. It's the largest concept that the web got wrong. Despite user agreements that profess consent, we spew data about ourselves across everything we do online. Location, purchase intent, reading interests, social interactions, likes, dislikes. Our data is a webbed avatar of who we are, and we've given that up freely. No other company knows this better at the moment than Facebook. And until recently, arguably the success story of Web 2.0. But what value do we gain versus what we give? Two little concepts up here. Facebook has created this like industrial complex. This is a term coined by a colleague of mine, Avery Irwin at Consensus. Facebook routinely conducts experiments to keep you online longer on how you react to positive and negative content. They batch and delay likes or hearts on Instagram so that you come back 5 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, or 30 minutes later. This makes you a commodity. It makes you a utility. Positive and negative input, delayed positive reinforcement. That sounds a lot like a lab rat. And what happens in a lab? You collect data, you learn, certainly for benefit. Well, for the benefit of Facebook, but not for yourself. They learn about what you want to buy, when you want to buy it, and want to become more precise and more targeting. They're trying and tying offline purchases and data to your location and engagement in real time online. It's the same for Amazon and Google. By the way, to be clear, I'm not anti-tech. This is what I've been doing in my life. This is why I worked for media companies. I've worked my whole career doing this, and I love it. I love digital media, and I love social media. I just want there to be an equitable share of value for those who create it. And it's not just the consumer, it's the creators of the content, the Mashables of the world, the BuzzFeed, the New York Times. 63% of the $33 billion global digital advertising market goes to those three platforms, Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And why? Because of this targeting, because of your personal data, they simply have a greater return on ad spend for the type of targeting I just mentioned. They simply move more people down that marketing funnel closer and closer to purchase intent. Shout out to my intro and marketing class there here at SVC for teaching me that one. See, Facebook is a platform. It's an exchange, but it's an exchange of what? On one side, you have supply side, you have publishers, digital media companies like Mashable, but also you and me on that side. Anyone who creates content and anyone who consumes it. Then on the other side, the demand side, so I'm getting into some of my economics courses that I took here, I'm just applying it all, just putting it all in there. Supply side there on the content, the demand side. You have brands and agencies wanting to reach you and me, and that's great. So they place the ads where they get that greater return on ad spend. And Facebook and Google are those exchanges where those two sides meet. But they're a centralized organization for where those marketplaces are. Facebook doesn't create the content or consume it. They're simply that destination. And for that, in 2018, they had $56 billion in revenue and $22 billion in net profit. But shouldn't the people that create the value earn the value? Or as Tim Berners-Lee says, shouldn't we restore that balance? So that brings us to blockchain. So I'm going to break down these core components that will lead us to concepts and eventually to the reality of self-sovereign identity. Okay, this is where I actually start talking about blockchain, so this is, you can get ready. This is all the preamble. This is good. This next one's for Rob DePasquale. Blockchain are ledgers. They truly are. I hate to break it to you, but they're exactly like your checkbook. They're general ledgers from your Accounting 101 class. It's a list. It's transactions. It's debits and credits. It's ins and outs. It's money and it's data. But it's not just your ledger. It's all of our ledgers. It's inputting all that information into a ledger at the same time and viewing all of those transactions in real time. It's one checkbook that we all write to. So what exactly does that mean? Let's imagine everybody in this room here is on a blockchain. A blockchain can be 3 people, it can be 30 people, it can be 300 people, 3 billion people. Look down, some people have notes or even your phone. If you have a notebook and you're taking notes, and that's your copy of the ledger, or your phone, that's your specific node on a blockchain. Now we all have a copy of that ledger, and of course, we're all connected to each other. Each time any one of us transacts, let's say I buy a bottle of water over there from Mike Walsh. I'm going to be picking on Mike a lot tonight, so it's going to be my little guinea pig over there. So when I buy that bottle of water and I want to transact online with Mike, say I've got $5 and I want to buy that water, every single copy of the ledger that's in your hand, that computer that's in your hand or that notebook, gets updated with that transaction. And that transaction is a block. Now, once a majority of the nodes verify via a consensus algorithm, which I'll get to in a second, that transaction is locked into place cryptographically, never to be adjusted or amended. It becomes immutable, it can't be changed. So on this ledger that I've transacted with Mike, it's like you've written in pen and not pencil into your checkbook. And once it's written in, it can't be changed. Now, technologically, that's new. That's a concept. Cryptography's been around for a long time, but the opportunity to create that through a system for us to interact with is. It's this consensus process that makes the transaction unique and secure, while at the same time making the results 100% transparent. It's a really fascinating concept. It's secure not because a bank verifies that it happened. It's secure because we all looked and realized that that happened. But it's 100% transparent. That's a very difficult concept to wrap around. 100% transparency, but 100% secure because of the technology. And that transparency creates a situation that means you no longer need to have trust amongst the people that you're operating with. Trust, we know, is a good thing, but we also rely on centralized institutions to protect our data or banks to protect our money. But trustlessness means that you don't require the trust to happen. If you don't need to have trust because of the fact that it's transparent and it's 100% secure so that it's safe, you produce an entirely different environment where you're able to transact peer-to-peer amongst people. You no longer require these centralized organizations to happen. Now, I'm going to say that a couple different ways and a couple different times, but that's the concept. So each of these transactions or blocks contain a link, a cryptographic hash, a timestamp that links back to that prior transaction to verify its provenance, to show that it's secure. This confirms that we're moving and linking back to the balance at the start of that ledger. Think of, you start your bank account, you put in $100, That's the beginning. That's that first transaction. And you do your debits and your credits and you get to the balance. But now each of those transactions that happen, hundreds, millions of transactions that happen, they have to be linked together to verify what that balance is. How much money do I have in my bank account? Does Mike have that bottle of water? So you have to be able to verify and connect that together. That is the chain part of blockchain. The block is the transaction, and the chain is what links it back to that situation. So, we're all on this distributed system with no central authority. We don't need that authority because all transactions are 100% transparent. We see the balances of the accounts. We verify those transactions in the order that they happen. And once recorded cryptographically, they can't be changed. If someone, say, hacked Rob DePasquale's node from that transaction, let's say his version, that node, his copy of that ledger gets corrupted, somebody wants to steal the $5 from that transaction, the rest of us would know that that copy was false. We've got 80 or so other transactions, 80 or so other nodes that verify what we have is actually the true version of it. So it's easy to hack a centralized organization. It's easy to hack a centralized database. Once you get in, you can fiddle with the data. But because we all have the same copy at the same time, you can't hack the majority of the computers in this room. Maybe you can hack one or two. That concept, aside from having the cryptography of it, on this distributed system, on this decentralized system, is what makes it unique. It's a nice little fancy way. It's a bunch of, it's not a bunch of cells. It's actually these wonderful little distributed communications from 1964. These are not new concepts. Centralized is what we have today. Every database, the internet itself, is centralized around Facebook and Amazon and banks. Tomorrow, Web3, blockchain, seeks to not have those central institutions, but to have a decentralized system where if we all get the same information at the same time, built on a distributed ledger, that's the fundamental difference, decentralization versus centralization. So here's another way to say it, another definition. Blockchain is a decentralized, distributed ledger of independent computers with a growing list of records, blocks, that contain cryptographic hashes linking back to the prior record, as well as the information of the current transaction. And each block is verified by consensus. It's the combination of this cryptography and human logic. In this way, you create a true peer-to-peer network. You're able to transact without knowing that person or relying on a single source for that transaction. It's because of that transparency. I don't need to know Mike to know that he owns that bottle of water. And he doesn't need to know me to see that I have the $5 in my ledger. We've created this trustless environment. For over 5,000 years, we've had ledgers that have kept first among local parties, then centralized organizations such as banks and other third-party security to do business. Today's currency is data, and that same information flows among these centralized organizations, gatekeepers of how to profit from it. Facebook holds my data. But now, with blockchain technology, you're able to transact business in a true peer-to-peer global environment that is secure, trustless, transparent, and immutable. So if there are 4 words that you need to remember tonight about blockchain, it would be those. Secure, because of the cryptography. Trustless, because of being on a distributed ledger. Transparent, because we have all of that same information at the same time. And immutable, it can't be changed. Those individually are not new concepts, but collectively pulling them together in this technology in a decentralized environment is what makes this so unique and so revolutionary for the next version of the internet. So how did this all get started? So it's time for some history too. So in 1991, Stuart Haber and W. Scott Stornetta were looking for a way to timestamp documents that couldn't be altered. They were looking for that immutability concept. This was formed from the concept of linking timestamps using Merkle trees. You don't need to know about what those are. It's part of a little computer science aspect. But they needed to require this information to be processed by a trusted source. But they used this concept of timestamping, of wanting to link documents together. So they figured out the chain portion of blockchain. Then, in 2009, a person named Satoshi Nakamoto penned this white paper. It's the first time we saw Bitcoin up there, so it's starting to get a little dicey. It's starting to get a little exciting. What's going to happen here? We don't know. We said Bitcoin. It's probably changed in value 18 times since I started this chat. But it's a person named Satoshi who penned this white paper. In this document, he posited that you don't need a trusted third party, that you could have the network itself verify future transactions, that consensus could be gained by the nodes, by each of these individual computers in the network, if given an incentive to do some really hard math to verify that transaction. This made the concept of the chain of linking these components together for the first time distributed and decentralized. You should all read that white paper, by the way. It's only 9 pages long. Bitcoin blockchain, and that's a lowercase b for Bitcoin, creates Bitcoins, capital B, which is the token and digital currency known as a cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrencies are not the same thing as blockchain. Cryptocurrencies are an application, a use case of blockchain technology. And while Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer payment system, proved blockchain technology worked, its only application was financial. But it proved that it worked, and that's what kicked us off. So for 6 years, from 2009 to 2015, folks tinkered with this. They proved the concept of a blockchain working that could be decentralized, secure, trustless, immutable, transparent. Then, in July of 2015, by the way, that was 3 years and 9 months ago. Only 3 years and 9 months ago. Ethereum came along and changed the game. Ethereum is a modified version of Bitcoin blockchain. Its express purpose is to do business on a blockchain, not just a financial payment system. It does this by using something called smart contracts, and has become the first and largest blockchain to be able to have decentralized applications that are built on top of this core protocol. So we're moving beyond just financial transactions into creating transactions and protocols and applications and creating new digital assets. Ethereum is an entirely different blockchain. Ethereum blockchain, lowercase e, has its own cryptocurrency, ETH. And Ethereum is the largest blockchain with over 180,000 developers working on the solution globally. There's that white paper. It was created by Vitalik Buterin, Gavin Wood, and Joe Lubin. Vitalik runs the Ethereum Foundation, a nonprofit that continues to refine this platform. And Joe founded Consensus, the for-profit company that builds the products and platforms and tools on top of the core Ethereum tech stack. And that's where I work right now. It's a little plug, harness the power of Ethereum. You can even read it up there, a global blockchain technology company. We have 1,000 people right now presently, which is crazy for a type of technology companies that's this new. Across 30 countries, largely Ethereum developers and solutions architects, largely tech folks. But when I joined in September of 2018, I was among the first employees that were brought in who had vertical domain expertise. A subject matter expert, I guess, as it were, to lead the development of solutions for the media and advertising industry. Other vertical leads are gaming and entertainment and sports, automotive, supply chain, movement of goods, and continues to be finance. By the way, Ethereum got its name from Vitalik as it's in a reference to, and I'm quoting, ether, referring to that hypothetical and visible medium that permeates the universe and allows light to travel. Kind of like a vast network, that medium, that allows transactions to happen in any direction. Light traveling. This is the peer-to-peer concept. So beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's over 2,000 different types of blockchains presently, and that's growing. Each iterating, each trying to improve on the work started by Bitcoin and Ethereum. So how does that work for self-sovereign identity? How is that trying to solve the problems? How is that trying to figure out this notion of what the first version of the internet got wrong, and this notion of personal data? So these next slides are from a company that Consensus helped incubate. And I'm going to just show them because these are actual slides that we use in presentations. I'm not going to dive in too deep through some of these. But you can see the concepts that I'm speaking about here. There's a belief that digital society is fundamentally flawed. There are a few winners in these networks. There's some shots here: Facebook, Netflix, Spotify. Read your private emails, read your private information. Things that I spoke about before. Now there's these new era of web applications. So 3box is a data network where users maintain control. You can see up there, that looks a lot like a profile, and it really is. It simply is going to look like a Facebook profile, but the back engine of it allows for you to have control and give you that permission to shut off where you give your information and how you give that information. This company has these deep applications regarding personal and identity that's core to media and advertising. This notion of a decentralized identity foundation, a nonprofit, is really designed to build the fundamental building blocks. These are large macro concepts that are trying to break out and understand how the interoperability is going to exist for how you represent yourself on the internet, where you actually have control of that information. That takes a lot to do. So there's many challenges that are associated with that. Energy is one of them. Cryptography is really hard math problems. It's becoming so hard when you have to meter out newly minted Bitcoin and Ethereum that is earned for doing the work. It's huge amounts of computational power that's needed to produce by server farms that expands energy into that's equal to small nations at the moment. Ethereum is moving in a different process that will reduce the energy consumption, but it's a very real reality that prohibits the work for this to happen. Markets as well. Because all leading blockchains have their own cryptocurrency, there's a public real-time valuation of what each cryptocurrency is worth. You can see here, these are the top 100. Bitcoin, when I did this, had a market cap of 70 billion. Ethereum had 15 billion. This is money that's been poured in. But this notion of actually having a real-time market valuation of an emerging technology, it's a fair and not fair comparison. It's unfair because to project that value, it's like if Facebook and Google had a stock ticker they were launched. Or for that matter, when HTML or HTTPS protocols did. Emerging technology doesn't necessarily need that pressure or speculation. In fact, all tech goes through these hype cycles. This is Gartner, one of the leading market research firms, and it goes through this hype cycle. The innovation happens, there's this peak of inflated expectation, that bubble bursts, and then you get into something called the trough of disillusionment. I just love the name of that. I feel like that's applicable to so many things in life. I'm in the trough of disillusionment right now. But hopefully you make it to the slope of enlightenment, and finally to the plateau of productivity. It's this concept, and this has consistently been proven for how every single innovation in tech has happened. Everybody gets super excited. Everybody begins to talk about it. And that component then finds its way, and of course it doesn't meet the expectations early on. And this is actually what's happening at the moment. I can't believe that people didn't believe that an entirely new internet wasn't built in 3 years. I mean, come on. Like, what's taking us so long? Bitcoin went down to 1900 and ETH went down, there we go, that's coming up, went down to $65. But that's ultimately good. It fleshed out speculators, but it really does find us now in this crypto winter. This is actually a term that people use. You can see there, that's our friends from HBO. We got some Game of Thrones fans in here. Yeah, all right, there we go. I like it. So this concept of crypto winter is coming. It's here. These prices have gone down. The system is contracted, and everybody feels that pressure. It's interesting, there's another little comment over there for winter is coming and hodl, right? There's the concept for Game of Thrones, but it's actually kind of funny. It's spelled hodl in that meme right there, because in December of 2013, during a flash crash of Bitcoin, in a chat room, a drunken user posted a rant about why he was holding on to his Bitcoin. He was holding. He just happened to spell it wrong and posted it, but he was so emphatic that it became this cry, this expectation for no matter what, that you'd have this steel stomach to hodl, to find if you were a true crypto believer. And that you will be rewarded handsomely for. So we always talk like, oh, the price is falling. Who cares? I'm going to hodl on to it. In any event, we are in the plateau of productivity at the moment, with some practical applications in real-world case studies. So according to MIT, blockchain is, in 2019, going to become boring, and I sure hope so. I would actually really like for my job to start being boring and have these practical applications. This is a concept that shows that the productivity enterprise software that's being developed. By the way, this is my Ethereum hot wallet. This is how I onboard on to Web3 at the moment. You'll notice, by the way, it doesn't say Mike Kriak. There's a bunch of gibberish letters right there in the middle. That's a public key to my transactions. My private key gets me into that public account. And so that's the ability to provide and have a certain amount of transparency that I know that that's mine and to be able to transact, but you don't need to know me personally. The other issue is scalability. Given the really hard math problems to mine new blocks, the cryptography and the fact that all nodes receive all transactions, the amount of time it takes to produce these transactions really isn't up to snuff yet. Current transactions on chains are actually only hundreds or thousands per second. Think about that. Only 100 or so transactions on Ethereum can be processed at this time. By comparison, Visa alone transacts 56,000 transactions per second. So this isn't some magic bullet yet. We're only doing 100 or so transactions, 56,000. This is the #1 problem that's being worked on by those 180,000 developers at the moment. Side chains are a leading option where you do a lot of work in a more centralized organization and put the important stuff on chain at the moment. But there's a lot of other ways to do that. Quantum computing, I'm sure, will help, and that will certainly be an ultimate game changer. So what's next? Where is this all taking us? So I penned this article about 2 weeks after joining Consensus from Mashable. What exactly is next? What exactly does this mean? Blockchain is this foundational protocol for the next version that puts users at the center of each transaction. I invite you to take a look at a company called Civil. It's a company that Consensus is incubating and that I advise on. It's a community-owned, decentralized platform for independent journalists. It's founded to advance trust and sustainability within journalism worldwide. Community members are news organizations and you and me for the public they serve. So how do you combat fake news? By making the community self-accountable, by making each of the communities verify the transactions themselves. When there's equal authority and you have that ability and work together, you can call out bad actors on a platform. You can't call out a bad actor on Facebook at the moment. Facebook is trying to have tens of thousands of individuals scrape off bad content. But the platform is too large, it's too centralized. You have to be able to create a democratic community or an organization that's able to call out those bad actors. It's a peer-to-peer environment. Newsrooms can benefit then directly from advertisers. You're removing those intermediaries. You know, at Mashable, whenever we would go and sell advertising, we'd put our content on Facebook. Facebook would sell the ads and keep 50 to 60% of the revenue. We created that content, but we got the distribution for the platform they had, but they kept that. Problem with that business model is that the ability to create that content and the cost to create that content didn't match up with the revenue that we got. But in a decentralized peer-to-peer environment, instead of me and Mike in that transaction, it could be an advertiser and it could be a publisher like Mashable, so that you would have the opportunity to create a true peer-to-peer exchange. If my users and my 100 million people watch and read Mashable at the moment, if they all permissioned their data in and received some value for that information, then those advertising dollars would go to 100% to Mashable and to its users, not 60% to a centralized organization like Facebook. So that's where you create sustainability in journalism, and this is what Civil is working on. But every vertical, and whether it's media or entertainment or healthcare, supply chain, financial services, you name it, enabling a peer-to-peer network has significant value. It places the individual at the center. Whatever your field of study, simply type in healthcare and blockchain or media and blockchain, journalism and blockchain, whatever interests you, I would encourage you to simply type those two words into that centralized organization called Google, until you have that now, and you're able to find that information. You'd be remarkable about how these fundamental concepts of creating a peer-to-peer environment changes the economics, changes the governance, it changes the ability to interact between and what happens online. So you can see this is more philosophical than just technical. It's interesting, you know, humanity has always struggled with identity and the power of the individual since the beginning of time. Self-sovereign ID may sound socialist or libertarian, and in some regards it is. I mean, think of what decentralization is. No central authority. Ownership of self in this digital age. By the way, for the literature students in the room, you'll note that my title of my talk, The Once and Future Internet, takes its name from the 1958 T.H. White novel, The Once and Future King, which chronicles and revises the tale of King Arthur and Camelot. And in the wake of World War II and the emergence of the Soviet Union as a world power, White wanted to tackle the themes of totalitarianism and the power of the individual that still had to combat those forces. So that kind of sounds similar to the power of the tech giants at the moment. So once Tim Berners-Lee's thought that the individual should be the internet, and in the future with blockchain it will be. Thus would be the once and future internet. Check out this quote from Joe Lubin, a co-founder, my boss. This is a quote from a town hall memo about a month ago. The decentralized web will promote a user-centric ethos in contrast to how the web is developed into a set of priorities that exploits users' personal information, that turns people into products, and addicts people to unhealthy long durations for repetitive use on the web to achieve selfish commercial goals of those companies. The decentralized Internet of Things and self-sovereign people will bring greater information security, personal and political agency, and prosperity to a far larger number of individuals of the global community than the current architecture of the web has thus far enabled. So in closing, I wanted to speak to some of the students directly. When I guest lecture in classes at New York, and even today I had that wonderful opportunity, They're like, how is it that you ran this global media company and now you're in blockchain and now you're a Broadway producer? Like, how's all that work? How do you get all that from an accounting degree? And I said, well, if you've ever had Rob DePascal, you'll know why. But the question really is you do it one thing at a time, one block at a time, fighting the urge to insert blockchain metaphorically into block by block. I just did, so I got credit for doing it that way. But you look at the step of where you are today for the students. Just really, what's that first internship about? Even if you're undecided and you're not quite sure, what interests you? For me, the concept of the new and the concept of the now, the concept of the next was born into when I traveled to London. So much possibility, then if that's London, then what's New York? And if this is the first version of the internet, what's the next version of the internet? What's the new? What is the future? That's why I moved to the Northeast to audit those first wave of internet companies after my internship at Arthur Andersen in Pittsburgh. That internet led to the future and still is the next, Web 3. And when Broadway wanted to tell a story about the internet and what it does and what it means to us and how it affects us, of course I wanted to get involved in that. That show, Dear Evan Hansen, and stories like them, how they permeate through our digital lives, as much as a live performance, to me, is the future of Broadway. It's the change in ways in which Broadway tells these stories. So the once and future internet, after all, blockchains are just ledgers. I learned about those ledgers in my Accounting 1 freshman class just a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, and just a few feet away. So you're always there, and you're always here now. Thank you.